Welcome to My Morning Cup, a podcast produced by Costa Media Advisors and presented by Rockpoint Bank and EPB. Rockpoint Bank, from Chattanooga for Chattanooga. And EPB, get EPB's fiber optics for the world's fastest community-wide internet. I'm Mike Costa, your host. My guest this week is Dr. Duncan Earl. Dr. Earl is a nationally recognized pioneer in practical quantum applications. He serves as Senior Director of Quantum Networking for IonQ. Duncan, before we learn why quantum physics won out over your desire to be a rock star, let me ask, what's in your morning cup?
So this morning, good morning, Mike, by the way.
How are you?
I'm doing well. This morning, kind of boring. I've got just some water in my cup. Normally, though, I would have Dr. Pepper.
Really?
I drink about 6 to 9 Dr. Peppers a day, and so I'm starting a new moderation phase. Probably will last about a week.
Yeah.
So I'm starting off with water this morning.
So you going full octane Dr. Pepper with the sugar, or
Absolutely. There's 23, different ingredients. I don't know what they are, but I'm pretty sure you shouldn't have 6 a day. So trying to cut back a little.
Wow, Dr. Pepper. We've had a lot of folks give us different answers on that, and I think that may be the first Dr. Pepper. We get a lot of Diet Cokes, Coke Zeros, but
oh yeah, Dr. Pepper, breakfast of champions.
What started that?
So about 15 years ago, switched from just drinking tea and Pepsi and Coke to I like the taste of Dr. Pepper, and really started kind of getting hooked on it. There's a small fan group of Dr. Pepper people out there that just love their Dr. Pepper and they won't drink anything else. And so that's my go-to drink. It becomes harder and harder to find, unfortunately. But I love my Dr. Pepper.
You ever do coffee?
Not much. I like caffeine, but never been a coffee drinker. Yeah. I never really went for the espresso. I like to stick to soft drinks.
Well, I got to think there's something in Dr. Pepper that makes you smarter than me.
Hey, I hope it's working. So,
well, it obviously is. As I said, welcome. We're glad to have you here. All the talk in Chattanooga is about quantum computing and trying to understand what that is, and you're heavily involved in that. But before I get to that, I want to start where you started, which was, where were you born?
So I was born in Bremerhaven, Germany, which is in far northern Germany, very cold place. I don't remember it very well. My father was in the military, and so I was born in a military base in Germany.
So you were an Army kid moving all around?
Army brat, moved all over the place, mainly between Europe and kind of Alabama, of all places.
Boy, there's a mix.
My dad had this really interesting job. He was worked on nuclear weapons and moved them around.
Oh, wow.
In Europe, they had these tactical nuclear weapons, which were nuclear weapons that still made a big bang, but they didn't shoot very far, which seems like a terrible design.
I want him to shoot really, really far away from me.
I'm not sure who shoots them, but he's an unlucky person. But the whole idea was they used these tactical nuclear weapons to keep the Russians from invading Europe. And so it was a way to you could use them against infantry groups. You could use them against Air Force. And that's what kept Europe safe for a long time. And
so this is the 70s and 80s when we had the Cold War going and it was all
That's right. And there were a lot of U.S. families living in Europe with the service members as they maintained those weapons. So I spent a lot of time in Europe as a result of that.
At what ages?
Up until about 16. I would say probably 80% of my time was in Europe.
So talk about that a little bit in terms of living in Europe as a 16-year-old American kid. Are you going to schools on the base? Are you acclimating to the culture in Europe? Do you want to get back to the United States?
Yeah, it's a little bit of everything. Sometimes they call them three-culture kids because you come from wherever you're originally from, Tennessee or Hawaii or Guam or wherever it might be. That's your first culture. And then you're an American living on an American base, so you're still identifying with that larger American identity. And then you're in a host country like Italy or Germany or wherever it might be. So you've got that third culture. So all of that gets combined. It makes for a diverse group of people you're living with and just a really rich kind of environment. So were
you, when you would move, particularly before you're up to your 16, were you always the new kid in class, or because it was an Army brat type thing, everyone was new?
So whenever we came back to the States, I was usually the new kid in class. But when we would go over to Europe, there were so many people coming and going that there really wasn't anyone new. But I went frequently to Huntsville, Alabama. And so there we went to public schools in Huntsville, and I usually was the new kid. So new school, new kid in school, it's always pretty tough, especially when you join like halfway through the year.
How many times do you have to do that?
I guess I did it 3 times. Total, we moved about 7 times. Yeah. So bounced around a little bit. But yeah, in my 12 years of high school, I went to probably 6 different schools, or elementary and high school.
How difficult was that for you, and what did you learn from that you take today in meeting people or acclimating people when you get to know them?
Yeah, that's a good question. I guess it taught me to blend in very quickly for safety reasons. You had to quickly adjust and adapt to whatever people were excited about and interested in. So it helps you to become a bit of a chameleon. Which is my wife, who's a pretty straight shooter. I call myself a chameleon. She says, "Oh, you're being phony." So I'm like, okay, well, hold on a second. You do have to keep yourself and your, what really guides you still intact. But it does allow you to blend in very well in different situations.
Do you have any siblings?
I've got one sister. Yeah, she's about 4 years older than me.
So you were kind of experiencing different things growing up because she was older than you. And
yeah.
It was like,
We stuck together. That was the one thing that we learned. So you have a built-in friend when you've got a sibling.
Yeah.
It makes you really close, and we traveled around a lot. And so the one thing that really hurt me with my sister is she's great with languages. So we moved to a new country. She could speak the language pretty quickly. I lived in Greece, Germany, Italy. I don't speak any of those languages. So it's really pretty sad.
Well, I would bet today you could find a beer in a bathroom if you had to.
If I had to, yeah. I can get the basics there.
Absolutely. So as a kid growing up, you're moving around, you're doing a bunch of things. What are some of the activities you're doing, both as part of the schools and then just on your own?
So was big into music. So yeah, as you said in the intro, I thought I was going to be a rock star in life. And so I played guitar and had a bunch of bands. And so was never really a very good student, but made enough to keep my parents happy. Like they would kind of leave me alone about it. So made good enough grades to get by. But that was really my passion, was music and trying to form bands.
Obviously rock music, but what was who were your influences and who did you want to be?
Yeah, so I love singer-songwriters, the Bob Dylans. I'm a huge John Prine fan.
Oh, there you go. Yeah. I'm the hugest John Prine fan. God bless you.
Yeah, love all his songs. They're just uplifting and enjoyable to listen to. And then was into whatever the current music was at the time, Motley Crue and Scorpion and all kinds of rock bands. But pretty broad taste. Later on, when I was 16, I moved to Tennessee and got really into country music and started enjoying that genre as well. So no genre was off limits. Loved them all.
Just liked music.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you're keeping yourself busy as a teenager, playing music and being that, but you also said you were a bit of a tinkerer.
Oh, yeah. So from the very beginning, enjoyed taking things apart and trying to figure out how things work and building and inventing things. Most of them were complete failures, just things that just did not work. But that was always my goal is to build something new that I was interested in. And it helped out with the family. There were things that were broken, and I was usually the guy that would fix them if I could. Used to fix things for Christmas presents for people. I loved going pawn shops, buying broken things, and then fixing them up. But that was my thought was, man, if I could be either a rock star or an inventor, I'd be a pretty happy guy. And I didn't realize that inventor wasn't actually a job, that you can't go out and get employed as an inventor, which was a bummer. But as a kid, loved to invent all kinds of things. Yeah.
Well, and I think you mentioned one of them to me, the hang gliding. Talk about that a little bit.
So my family loves to still make fun of me for most of these inventions, but one of them, and it was a legit invention, it was I was trying to make a hang glider that you could retract it. So if you accidentally flipped over, you could retract it and then you could extend it again. Apparently, it's a problem with hang gliding. You flip upside down and you can actually run out of control or get out of control.
They don't tell you that as you're running off the cliff.
Yeah, that's right. It's one of those hard lessons, I'm sure, to learn. So the retractable hang glider seemed like a great idea, but in building it kind of looked a lot like a bird wing. It looked exactly like a bird wing. You could pull it in just like a bird could. And to try and get some testing on it, we had a barn, and I was jumping off the barn trying to get the right fit to everything. And Yeah, so that goes down as Duncan was building bird wings and jumping off the barn when he was a kid. Kind of exaggerated it a bit, but that was my goal, a retractable hang glider.
And I hope your family realizes that's how Orville and Wilbur Wright started, was jumping off a barn. So you were
That's
right
true.
there with them.
Yeah, they reminded me that one of them died, though. Yes. Fortunately, I pulled out before that happened.
Yeah. As you're growing up, did you have part-time jobs, high school jobs, those kind of things?
Yeah, I started working when I was about 12. That we had a grocery store there, and you could work for tips. And so you bag people's groceries, take it out to their car.
Was this in Alabama?
This was actually in Vicenza, Italy. So it was on an army base, and I was terrible at it. I left people's bags. I wouldn't pack them properly, so my tips weren't great. But I was learning quickly, and my first real paying job was in Huntsville, Alabama, working for Crystals. I think we still have some Crystals in the area. And they had the Crystal Creed, and you had to swear allegiance to Crystals or that you would do a good job. And it was a great job for me at the time. Gave me some extra money. But it quickly, I always was washing, basically I was always cleaning the bathrooms.
Yeah.
Any job I was in from about 16 to 18, I was cleaning the bathrooms. So it got old pretty quick. And so I would often stay a few months at a job, switch out, go to a different job, keep moving.
What do you think those either taught you or did for you as you were growing up?
So definitely taught the value of $1. I mean, and how much you have to work to get just $1. I think at the time it was $3 was the minimum wage. So it was a lot of effort, just to, pay the bills. Mm-hmm. But the other thing was that I probably didn't want to clean bathrooms for the rest of my life. And so I really wanted to try and find a skill that maybe I could use to make more dollars. And so that then started me trying to really figure out what is it I want to do. When you're 16, you don't
Right.
really care, right? You're just trying to make a buck and have a good time on the weekend. But as I got closer to 18, getting out of high school, that's when it really started to become serious. I got to figure out what I'm doing.
So as you get in high school, you're 16, you're back in the States, and you mentioned you weren't the best student, but I would imagine based on where you are now, you became a better student through the end of high school and into college.
I did definitely wait till the very last minute. When I was when I was 16, moved to Granger County, Tennessee, which is where my family was from there. So we had visited in the summers, and my whole life I'd been going back there on vacation, but finally had moved there permanently when I was about 16. So I went to a school called Rutledge High School in Granger County, Tennessee. And that's when I started to apply myself a little bit more. I still wanted to be a musician, and I did compete in different county fairs and talent shows, and actually won the opportunity to play at the Ryman Auditorium at Grand Ole Opry.
The Mother Church?
Yeah, that's right. And they had record labels there, and so, but that was in my senior year, kind of towards the end of my senior year, and they had a whole bunch of people that had made it to that point and were auditioning for these record labels. And I played guitar, I thought, pretty well, but these people were just incredible. One guy, it's like he had 20 fingers on one hand.
Really?
I mean, he was really good. And that's when I realized I will never, ever be as good as these people.
Do you still play today?
I still do, and I'm still mediocre. But yeah, I realized at that point, okay, the musician route is probably not going to happen.
Well, and I found this interesting with you having a love for music and being, with your science background and physics and quantum physics. My son-in-law is a structural engineer, yet he plays the guitar. And I said to him one day, and maybe you can give me some insight on this, I find it unusual that you've got this very analytical degree, yet the very creative love of music. And he says, well, really, music's very analytical. It's very process-based. You find that true?
Oh, absolutely. And I think you can go into any tech company and immediately form a band. There's a ton of musicians in there. And good musicians as well. I think they need an outlet for that creative piece, which it's not always available at work. So it's nice to have an instrument that you can turn to when you need that.
Yeah. So you're at Rutledge High School. You're going to college. You decide to go to Tennessee. Why did you pick the majors that you picked? And just talk about your path through the University of Tennessee, because you stayed for all three degrees,
I
right?
did, yeah. And when I started out again, I was very naive as a young guy. I really did want to be an inventor, and was sad to find out that wasn't a degree that was offered at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville.
You should have said moonshiner.
Yeah, that would have been a good option too. So I when I went to University of Tennessee, they said, you could go the physics route. That seems like it might fit well with you. You could go a science route, or you can go the engineering route. And I liked both of them. But what I didn't like is I was terrible at like liberal arts classes and history. I just got bored by those. As I got older, they became a whole lot more interesting. But at 18, they were not my thing. And so they had this degree called engineering physics, and it was basically both. You got to do both of those at the expense of the liberal arts classes. And so I was like, this is perfect for me. I can learn engineering, I can learn science. I'll be the world's best inventor if I can just get all that information. So I went the engineering physics route. Didn't realize you're actually kind of the black sheep in the University of Tennessee. In most colleges, you're not an engineer, you're not a physicist, so no one really owns your path, and makes it a little difficult sometimes, but really enjoyed that major. That's what I got my BS degree in. I then went for a master's degree, really loved physics, was doing a whole lot of work in optical, and so went to the University of Tennessee, Knoxville for my master's degree in optics. It was in physics.
Did you just stay, or did you go into the workforce and come back?
So as soon as I finished my BS degree, it had been a lot of school at that point, and so I was like, I need a little bit of a break. And I went actually for a few months to Alaska. I went and worked for the state parks in Alaska. And there I was I think I called it a trailblazer. I was cutting down trees and doing stuff I had no idea what I was doing. But they were trying to make a new state park just north of Fairbanks. And they had a number of people that were already hiking there. And so a couple of people had died. They'd gotten lost. And so they were like, well, let's turn this into a state park. We'll build proper trails and shelters in case people, run into bad weather. And so that's what I did for a few months up in Alaska, is I made those trails and built those shelters. Got really bad lost for about 3 days. Me and a few people ran into some bad weather. So the problems they were having with people hiking there, we encountered as well. But it all worked out in the end. But that was a really fun experience between bachelor's and master's.
They obviously found you, but what happened? I mean,
the weather can change really quickly up there in Alaska. And so we were hiking up to the top of this mountain ridge to identify a place to put an emergency shelter, because people had gotten lost there before. And a big fog came in, a very heavy fog, and then it started raining and a little bit of snow. And this is in the summer. It doesn't usually happen up there in Fairbanks. And so that weather just made it to where you couldn't figure out where to go. And the way you typically would navigate on top of these mountains is they'd have these rock piles, and you follow the rock piles. But when the fog gets really thick, you can't figure out where to go from one pile to the next. And that's exactly what happened to us. So we got lost. Eventually, we found our way down to a creek and kind of followed the water out. But for about 3 days, we didn't eat much. So it was a lot of hiking and no eating.
So that had to be unnerving.
That's when I realized, hey, it's really nice to live in civilization. You got hospitals and people that can take care of you. So a good experience. Definitely, don't regret that I did it. I'm glad I did it, but made me appreciate what you have in a civilized area.
So you come back, you've had this experience, you come back and say, you know what, I'm going to get my master's degree and move on to the next thing.
Absolutely. Yeah, I realized two things in Alaska. First was I definitely wanted to go after my master's degree and maybe a PhD, but I wasn't sure. And the second was the girl I was dating. I really liked her and missed her. And so I was going to marry her. That's what I did. I'm going to marry that girl and I'm going to go after my master's. And that's what I did when I came back.
Oh, it provided a North Star for you.
It did. Yeah. It just helped clarify things very, very much so.
So you get back to Knoxville, you get your master's. Again, kind of the same question. Did you decide to stay and get your PhD, or did you go into the workforce at all?
So at that point, quickly became married. And so my wife was 18 and I was 22 when we got married. So we were pretty young. And we definitely needed some money. So Oak Ridge National Laboratories had some openings, not many. There was kind of a hiring freeze going on at the moment. But I was able to come in as kind of an intern and work part-time. And so as I worked on my master's, I also was working at Oak Ridge National Labs, and that started building kind of a network within Oak Ridge National Labs. And ultimately, I did get hired during my master's to work at Oak Ridge National Labs. And I thought, okay, well, I'm working now full time, so getting a PhD probably isn't going to be in the cards for me, but that's okay. I'm married, was trying to buy a house, was making some money. I thought this is a pretty good start. I'm on my way. Was happy with that at that stage. Yeah.
Yeah. So when you got to Oak Ridge, was it still very defense based, or was it becoming more open to commercial application?
They were just going through the transition. So they were essentially a weapons lab and had been. They were enriching uranium. I was working at Y-12 when I first started working there. And they had made the decision at the federal level to no longer do the centrifuge enrichment. And so everybody that was working at the Y-12 plant was soon to be out of a job unless they could figure out something else to do. And so there was this transformation happening at Oak Ridge National Labs where they were moving from the more weapons-based research into public research, and so everybody was trying to learn that process. And it was I was in there with a lot of people that were quite a bit older than me, and they were scratching their heads, struggling how to sort of make that transition. But they didn't want to retire, or it was too early for them to retire, and so they were forming groups and figuring out how to do it. And so I was fortunate to be involved in that. It was almost like a small business a little bit, because they were really kind of on their own. And so I found myself with a sensing group that really was being successful. They were going out, getting money, federal funding, to do some new types of research, and they were starting to make that transition.
Yeah, and just hearing you describe it, it sounds like the impact is that you got to experience at a very young age how a big government entity like that has to pivot, and really start to apply itself to the commercial world as opposed to just government funding.
Yeah, and people that were extremely specialized, very, very good at what they did.
Yeah.
But I met a person who for 20 years had been studying the vibration in a spinning rod, and knew all about the modes of vibration. He was extremely specialized in this one area, and it was definitely needed for centrifuge research. But beyond that, it was really tough for him, right? Because he couldn't translate that into something that could be used in the civilian world. So from that, I learned, okay, you got to be diversified. You got to be more of a generalist. Can't be overly specialized. As fun as that is, you do have to be more general.
Yeah. When did you get your PhD through this process?
So I'd given up on the PhD, was happily working, making money. And then I guess at the time, there was the director of the lab, a guy named Alvin Trivelpiece. And he was touring the different labs, and he saw some of the research I was doing in optical sensing. And he said, this guy needs to go back and get his PhD. It wasn't because I was brilliant or anything like that. It was because I was young. And everybody was older. I think the average age was like 55. And so they're like, okay, this guy's younger. Let's get him a PhD. Let's send him back to school. They had a program that would allow you to take 2 years off from work just to do the classwork. And then when the classwork was finished, you came back and you did your PhD research in the area that you were already working on. So that's how I went back and did my PhD.
And your PhD was in electrical and computer engineering?
It was. I'd had enough of physics with my master's, and trying to keep that split between engineering and physics, I went back for electrical and computer engineering, and ended up doing work in AI, of all things, where I took these chips called field programmable gate arrays. It's a little boring, but these FPGAs, you can reprogram them, and you can basically put like a little brain on it. And then that brain can try and evolve. The chips can evolve. You can try out lots of different versions. You expose them to different tests, and whichever ones perform better, you can kind of breed them and create new versions of them. So this was a evolvable hardware for AI, and as a result, I was able to produce these AI chips that could work better than any human had programmed these different tasks. And I presented it for a big NASA conference when I was all done. And NASA said, not NASA, but the people that were at the conference that were, also co-presenters, was great research, very interesting, looks really cool. Problem is, it'll never be used by NASA because you can't really figure out how it works or when it'll stop working. And that was a real limitation of the technology. So I got out of AI, but that was my small stint.
I was going to say, we might need to go back to talking about John Prine for me to stay in this conversation.
No worries.
Because
Happy to do that too.
Yeah. So you get, how old are you when you get your PhD?
So gosh, I was That's a good question. I think it was about 28.
That's pretty young, isn't it, for a PhD?
It was. I was a little bit older actually than others because I'd taken some time off to work. But yeah, so I was right in the band. Yeah.
So you're at Oak Ridge. You got your PhD. What's next for you?
So at Oak Ridge, there was lots of great thing about working at Oak Ridge is they had 4,000 scientists doing all kinds of different things. So it was exciting. You could dabble in a lot of different stuff. The part that I was probably most interested though was in quantum optics, and at the time they had 2 people doing quantum optics.
And what are quantum optics?
So quantum mechanics is the study of particles it's the study of the physics at the very, very small level. And physics, when you get down to the particle level, is very strange. It's not like the physics we're familiar with. For example, you can have one particle that can actually be in multiple places at the same time. That's perfectly allowed. Or you could have 2 or 3 or 4 particles that look like distinct particles but are actually the same particle, and they behave in a correlated way. So they call that entanglement and superposition. They've got all these different names, but at the time they were starting to realize that these new physics, we could harness this new physics to do all kinds of cool stuff. Like we could make better security systems. We could make sensors that could blow past the limits that were on classical sensors. We could maybe even make computers that were really, really powerful. And so that was a new field that was just emerging. Oak Ridge had a very small group, and I wanted to help build that and grow that. And so I was very fortunate to work with some really skilled people that had spent already a decade studying these effects, and they were had innovative research that they were including me in. So that's how I got introduced to quantum optics.
So you're introduced to it, but you also went out on your own with the solar light company?
So at about the same time, there was another project I was working on where they were capturing sunlight into optical fibers and piping it into a building. It wasn't necessarily my go-to R&D thing, but it was close to commercialization. And so I thought, well, I gotta be general. I've got to be able to do more than just one thing, and it would be good to start a business and understand how that process works. And part of what motivated this is I had met a gentleman a few years earlier, and I told him the same thing about I really just want to be an inventor, but I understand that I've got to go the science route. And he told me something really useful. He said, Duncan, no one person really invents anything anymore. It takes a team of people. All the easy stuff's already been invented. And so if you really do want to make new technology, you better figure out how to build a team and how to run a team, how to fund it, all of those things. And so when I had the opportunity with the daylighting, the solar light and fibers, I thought, okay, this is an opportunity to figure out how do you actually build a product? How do you find the investors to pay for it? How do you commercialize it? How do you get those first products sold? And so that's part of the motivation for starting that. So I spun that company out of Oak Ridge National Labs and spent about 6 years working on that company. And we did produce a product. It was successful. We had like 30 installations around the country. We're doing a few million, not a lot, a few million in sales of a product that would catch sunlight with something that looked like a satellite dish. And it would pipe it into a fiber, and that fiber would bring the sunlight into the building. And you could have natural lighting in the interior of a building. So when the clouds came over, it would dim. You would see what was happening outside. You could see inside. It was a really neat product. A lot of people liked it, but it was very mechanical was the one challenge.
Yeah. You mentioned that you wanted to learn how to put together a company and a product. Was that a conscious thought at the time that you were doing that? Or in retrospect, you look back and go, you know what, that taught me a lot of these things that I used to grow my career.
Yeah, so I definitely don't want to fall in the trap of, which I think I have a tendency to do, of thinking I did it for a reason. Yeah. When really you just look back and you're like, okay, that may have been a reason, but I didn't know it at the time. It's kind of like the guy that throws a knife at shoots arrows at a tree. And then after the arrow hits the tree, he draws the bullseye around it, right? You come back later and you think, wow, this guy's a perfect shot. But for me, there was like a twinge that, hey, this might be something good to do, but I don't think I had thought it through enough. But looking back, it taught me a tremendous amount. It taught me one of the most important things was just you need money to grow a business. And the money, unless you've got it yourself, you have to have a partner that provides it. So where do you find those partners? How do you partner with the right person? That was a key part.
How long did you have the solar company?
About 6 years.
And that was separate from ORNL?
Yeah, I took an entrepreneurial leave from Oak Ridge National Labs to do that. I licensed the technology from the national lab. And then I found, in San Diego, I found angel investors. They had a really active angel investment group. And so I went out there and pitched some ideas. And at the time, well, still the way California has all this money, right? So that's where most of the investors were located at. And so I went out and I found 2 investors that wanted to invest in it. And from there, we started to grow the business.
And how did you exit that?
So painfully. so it was going okay. I wouldn't say it's going great, but we were growing sales. Our product was getting more mature. We were reducing the cost of it. But to do that, we had to take loans. And this was before the Great Recession. And banks they were loaning money like crazy. And so we had taken quite a lot of loans. And then the recession hit, the banks' credit froze, they wanted their money back, and pretty much the company collapsed in the Great Recession.
Yeah.
So I was living in San Diego at the time because I'd moved my family out there like a year prior to that. So that we could focus more with the investors and really build a business plan that could grow more rapidly. But when that recession hit in San Diego, there were people that were getting kicked out of their homes. Yeah. They were living in tents near the airport. And I looked at my wife and I'm like, we got to get back to Tennessee. This is going south, and we gotta get out of here quick. So that's when I decided to go back to Oak Ridge National Labs. The way the entrepreneur program worked is you could come back if you needed to. And so I came back after being gone for a while.
Yeah. And how long were you there before you took your next adventure into Cubitech?
So I went right back to doing the quantum research I was doing before. I was there for a few years, probably 3 or 4 maybe at that point. And just like with the previous business, the technology was getting closer to commercialization. And so as I saw there were products spinning out specifically around entangled photon sources, basically the engines that produce this entanglement, this weird quantum phenomena that you can leverage. I realized, okay, the work I'm doing at Oak Ridge, this is actually the foundation for a new business, and quantum's going to be just taking off. I thought really soon. This was back in like 2013. I thought it was going to be taking off really soon. It took more like a decade, but I was in early and was well positioned. So spun out after 3 or 4 years and did another business called Cubitech.
Yeah, and if you will, talk about that a little bit. What Cubitech did, and not just the lessons you learned from the solar company in terms of banks who are willing to lend money until the Great Recession hits, but how did that change, not necessarily change, but how did you operate differently with Cubitech than you did with your solar company?
Yeah, so definitely smarter the second time around, right? So, what is the saying? Success is a poor teacher. And with the first business, I did not have success, and it had taught me a lot. And so the first thing was to find a secure source of funding. So I co-founded Cubitech with a gentleman named Stan Ellis, and he was an angel investor from Bakersfield, California. And at this time, Bakersfield, California, I think this statistic is right, they had more millionaires per square mile than anywhere else in the United States. And it mainly came from oil and ag.
Did you say Bakersfield?
Bakersfield, California.
Isn't that pretty rural in the Dwight Yoakam song?
It is,
Streets of Bakersfield?
Absolutely, it is. And so you'd think, well, it wouldn't be where you would expect to find all these millionaires.
You think San Francisco and L.A.
Yeah, you think tech, right? That'd be where it's at. But they do ag in a crazy way. I mean, one guy I met that was a potential investor. He was a carrot farmer. So we went out to go see his carrot farm. Well, it's just carrots as far as the eye can see. I mean, it's an insane number of carrots. So, and they had a guy grew grapes, another guy grew pistachios, but we built kind of a group of investors from ag and oil.
Interesting.
And that's what actually started the company. And Stan Ellis is an interesting guy. He actually, He bought Buck Owens' ranch out there. And so, if you've heard Streets of Bakersfield and all that, there's a connection to it. He bought Buck Owens. He plays guitar. He plays at this place called the Crystal Palace. He himself is a musician. Really neat, interesting guy. And that's who I partnered with to start the
Sounds
company.
right up your alley, too.
Oh, yeah. He's a lot of fun, and we had a lot in common. And so it was nice to have somebody that, one, wasn't taking out a loan for the company. He was bankrolling it more from his own funds, and he had experience with small businesses as well. So that's how we started Cubitech, which was probably a better footing than the first company.
And what did Cubatech do?
So initially we were building components like entangled photon sources and detection systems for single photons, basically everything you need to be able to exploit and measure these quantum physics of the very small. And we were trying to build something called a quantum network, which is a network that distributes these entangled bits or quantum bits, qubits, around a fiber optic network to tie together different quantum technologies.
In the little bit I understand of it, I understand quantum computing is light years faster. And that does you a lot of good, but not nearly as much good if you're networking the computers. Yeah,
I would say the networking is kind of the infrastructure that ties it all together. So right now we've got the internet, and that's really just a big network of classical computers. And so, of course, no one would describe the internet as a network of classical computers anymore. It's taken on a whole life of its own. And that's what we're starting to see happen with these new quantum technologies as well. There's quantum sensors, there's quantum processors, there's quantum security systems. All of those can be networked together over a fiber optic network to make them into something bigger than they are. If it helps, one way I like to think about it is like your body is made out of a bunch of cells, right? They're simple. They don't have any high, degree of function. They're pretty specialized in what they do. But I don't think of myself as a pile of cells.
Right.
I think of myself as, more than that. And so I'm more than just the sum of my parts. And that's because they're all coherent. They're operating in a coherent, coordinated way to create this thing that functions at a much higher level. That's what a quantum network does as well. It can take a bunch of small little quantum computers or quantum sensors, and it can pull them into a bigger whole, something that functions at a much higher level. So you can have lots of small quantum computers that on their own are maybe not that powerful, but together they're a super powerful computer, way, way more powerful than anything we have today, solving problems we could never solve today.
That's a great explanation.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate that.
No, I mean, that was fifth grader level for me. I got that one. So you've got Cubatech going, you're creating components. What brings you to Chattanooga? How do we get you here?
So interesting story there. So I'm in San Diego at the time because I've got these investors in Bakersfield. So I'm going back and forth between Tennessee and California. I've been doing it now for probably a decade with these two different companies. And at this point, we're to the point where we can deploy a quantum network and start running fibers and moving quantum bits across these optical fibers. And we were working with a utility, I won't mention their name, but a utility in California as part of a Department of Energy grant. And the utility in California, great utility, but they just couldn't give us the access we needed. Like we needed to get into their substations and be able to access their optical fibers and work with their engineers to solve problems. And they just couldn't support it. And so we had talked with the Department of Energy and said, this program isn't moving forward because our utility partner just isn't able to sort of hold up their end. And so the Department of Energy said, have you heard about this company, this utility, EPB, in Chattanooga? Now, I'd lived in Knoxville for a long time, worked at Oak Ridge, but I hadn't actually heard of EPB. And so DOE made some introductions. And through that process, Cubatech got to know EPB a whole lot better. In fact, I think EPB, within like a week, turned in all the documentation needed to switch from using our San Diego or California utility to using EPB as our partner in that project. And it was a world of difference. EPB could put fiber in the ground when and where we needed it. They had engineers that were willing to work with us to understand how the technology needed to be integrated into what they had. At this time, we were looking at a security solution. And so being able to do a demonstration of that quantum security solution using some of the EPB facilities, it all became possible. And that's when we realized this is a very unique utility. It's extremely progressive. We met people like Jim Ingram and David Wade and people that were they were visionary and extremely strategic in what they were doing. And so we recognized this is a partner we've got to get close with.
As someone who's been here for 25 plus years, I don't think the average Chattanoogan realizes, and I think we do realize to a degree, but just to the extent that putting fiber in put us on the map. EPB
Absolutely.
obviously on the map, but when you've got the government saying, oh, you don't like the San Diego utility, here's little Chattanooga, Tennessee.
Yeah. And the fiber, they didn't stop at just fiber for internet, right? They were open to what else could we use this fiber for? Well, you can transmit quantum bits across it. And so, okay, so how do we do that? What does that eventually do for our community? How can it help us? Being that ahead of the game really was unique. And of course, being a municipally owned utility as well, it had a connection back to the community. So it wasn't just like a private company just wanting to get in it for profits. It really was, how do we make this technology serve our community and help our members? So that was a really exciting addition when we had that partner with EPP.
Yeah. So that gets you here.
It does.
And what's the next process? Because then you hook up with IonQ.
So hadn't yet hooked up with IonQ. We were still a small company, and we were just doing Department of Energy grants with EPB. Oak Ridge National Lab was involved in those as well. So we were proving out the technology, but the technology was rapidly maturing into something bigger than just a security application. It was turning into this quantum network that could eventually tie together quantum computers and quantum sensors. And it was EPB that really reached out to us and said, hey, we could go a step further. We could build a quantum network in Chattanooga, the first commercial quantum network. If we partner on this, and we can show the rest of the world what quantum infrastructure looks like, and eventually, more devices could be brought onto that network, and we could connect with other networks across the country. So it was EPB that pushed us to explore building a commercial quantum network, which we ended up doing. We did a deal with EPB, brought the first commercial quantum network to EPB. I think it was in 2023, about that time. And this was the first time anyone had pulled together all of these components to where you could share these quantum bits across a dedicated fiber optic network to tie together quantum devices. And that's kind of where we're at today. But that caught the attention of one of the largest quantum computing companies in the country, a company called IonQ, multi-billion-dollar company, basically building small quantum computers that they wanted to network together. But they needed a quantum network to do that.
So they're building the computers, and you had the network knowledge.
That's exactly right. And put those two together, and that's where we're at today.
One of the things I read about all of this before we sat down is that one of the great advantages, one of the big things Chattanooga has to gain is to be a proof city.
Yeah.
Talk about that a little bit. Explain what that is and why people in Chattanooga should be excited about what that holds.
So when it comes to quantum, where we're at right now with the technology is there's a lot of great lab work that's been done, some very neat research that has happened, but it's starting to become commercialized into applications that people are willing to pay for, that generate revenue and provide real benefits, but they have to be proven somewhere. And so you've got to be able to have the infrastructure to deploy those solutions quickly, and you've got to be able to have a community that's ready to absorb that. So that's what we have here in Chattanooga. There's great research happening across the world, but if you really want to deploy a quantum solution and offer it as a service, Chattanooga is the best place. It's the easiest place to do it. They're a quantum network. They now have a quantum computer as well. They're building up, really an ecosystem, a quantum ecosystem in Chattanooga, and that's going to make it easier for these companies to come here, deploy their technology, hopefully manufacture their technology as well, and grow the quantum ecosystem with us. So I think Chattanooga by far is in the lead. There's other cities that are trying to do similar things, but EPB and Chattanooga are leading the way.
What does that mean in terms of allied businesses and spin-offs and things like that? Or are we even there yet?
I think we're there. Yeah, I think we are there. And when you quantum companies today are some are publicly traded, some are still private, but these are billion-dollar companies that are looking for a home for their manufacturing or a new office. We want to be attracting them for a couple of reasons. One, we want to grow our capabilities here, what our quantum networks and our quantum ecosystem can do. We want to be able to improve our education systems, not just at the college level, but even K through 12, building kind of a pipeline so that we can provide workers for these businesses, deploying the infrastructure, deploying fiber optic networks that are meant for quantum involves, digging up a whole new lines for optical fibers and maintaining those. So you've got software maintenance, you've got hardware maintenance, all that goes into maintaining these quantum networks.
Does the fact that we've already got all this fiber laid, does that benefit us, or do you have to put even more down?
So it helps. I would argue we need to put even more down.
Yeah.
More fiber is even better. But it also means we've already got the skills here to do it, right? We have people that have done this before with the classical fiber optic networks. Now we're going to have people that can do it on the quantum side. And it's going to start in Chattanooga, but it'll spread throughout the whole country and eventually the whole world. So being the epicenter for that growth is an exciting place to be.
And I think this quote's attributed to you, Duncan, and I want to have you expand on it. Quantum technology has the potential to significantly improve the world.
Yeah.
How is that?
So the biggest, maybe the most obvious thing I can compare it to is kind of the internet. So obviously, if it was 1985 and I was telling you about the internet, it'd be very hard to imagine how it was going to change our lives. And now it's much more obvious. Quantum technology is going to do the same thing and probably even more so, which is scary. I mean, that's disruptive. We've already had a lot of disruption due to technology, but we have this potential to really make things better with quantum. So AI is powerful already with traditional classical computers, but with quantum computers, you could have AI that's just unfathomably more capable than it is today.
Can you give an example of something? I know it's not far-fetched, but...
Sure. So maybe two very realistic ones. Right now, security is a challenge. Anything you do over the internet is challenging to secure. Cryptography potentially has a limited lifetime before we can crack certain codes that we're using today. So we are approaching something called the cryptocalypse, which is where our cryptography starts to fail. Quantum is an immediate solution there. You can apply quantum technology today that will fix that vulnerability and will make our classical communications secure. So that's like a very mundane but near-term and obvious
and
way.
Needed.
And definitely needed, yes. The second one is on the computing side. There are problems today that our fastest supercomputers, it would take them like 1 billion years to solve them. Most of them are around chemical, pharmacological, drug development, things like that, weather, climate change. These are really, really challenging multivariable problems that are very difficult to solve with classical computing. That type of problem, quantum computers are very good at solving. And so as we make quantum computers bigger, which is going to require networking to make them bigger, you've got the ability now to solve something that would have taken 1 billion years. You could solve it in a few days. So that type of processing, computing jump is really only possible with quantum, and it'll lead to new drugs, better predictions on earthquakes and weather forecasts. Definitely new materials will come out of this. All of the chemistry we do today will get better. That's all just due to computing and quantum computing specifically.
And the way I understand it and explained to me was that quantum is obviously faster because a regular computer reads the ones and the zeros in kind of a linear fashion.
Right.
And a quantum computer, it's almost like a snapshot of all the ones and zeros and just absorbs all that right away. And so it makes it that much faster. But your quantum computer is only so fast, but when you network it, it's on steroids.
Yeah, and that's a good way to think of it too. The quantum technology allows you to evaluate every possibility at once rather than doing it linearly. The challenge is making a quantum computer that's big enough to really solve hard problems, and that's where the field is today. The quantum computers are still pretty small, and they can't really tackle some of these really interesting problems. We'd love to cancer research problems, protein folding problems. So how do you make a bigger quantum computer? That's where we're at today. We believe networking is the solution to that, and that's why the EPP quantum network is so important. It is that proving ground for showing that you can do that, showing how you tie together these quantum computers and make a bigger one.
You've given me a lot to think about. I've got a couple more questions for you, but before we got to go, and one of them is, can you talk a little bit about the next 5 years? And again, from the average Chattanoogan perspective, I know the bigger implications, but someone who's quite frankly writing a check to EPB every month for their utilities. Why is it so important that they're involved in this?
Yeah, so when it comes to solving problems with quantum computers, optimization is one of the things that it does really well. And we have definitely some serious energy, demand usage challenges that are facing all countries, all states. How do we manage our energy better? That's where a quantum computer can definitely help. Managing the electrical grid, you have to be careful about how you integrate something like that, but securing and managing the electrical grid, quantum technology can help as well. But if you look at the next 5 years, probably the thing that's going to stick out the most, or that's going to be the most obvious to most people, is very similar to kind of what you've seen in AI. I mentioned 15 years ago, I was working in AI and I quickly got out of that because it looked like it was never going to become anything useful. And then there was ChatGPT, and they had that ChatGPT moment where all of a sudden everybody realizes there's been this huge leap in capability, and now AI is going to change our lives. And we're all seeing that. We're all living through that now. In the next 5 years, you're going to see the same thing with quantum technology. Whether it's on the sensing side, the security side, or the computing side, you're going to have these breakthroughs that start to penetrate the news cycle, and people realize, hey, there's a new technology that is just as disruptive as AI or the internet or personal computing that's going to really impact my life. And we don't for sure know where those breakthrough points are going to initially be. So the whole community is waiting to find out which applications kind of percolate to the top and penetrate first. But we do see that happening in the next 5 years, and we'll all be experiencing that together.
And Chattanooga stands to benefit.
100%.
Being ground zero, for lack of better description.
Absolutely. Just like when the internet started to explode, the people that had the proper communication channels to and the land to host data centers and things like that, they became the hub for these larger internet that ultimately propagated across the country. We'll see the same thing with quantum. By far, Chattanooga is the best positioned of any city to take advantage of that.
Well, and when this podcast is released, I believe it's in conjunction with World Quantum Day. So
perfect.
We're going to be hearing more about quantum, not just on World Quantum Day, but for what's going on here and really what is our economic development for the next 20, 25 years.
That's right. And 5 years ago, there wasn't even a World Quantum Day. So,
right.
That's how quickly things are advancing.
Yeah.
But now it's been going for a number of years. And I think we're going to see that steady build of quantum technology and a higher presence in people's minds of what this technology can do.
Duncan, you made this much easier for me to understand, although I still don't understand it completely. I'll at least admit that. Before I get to my last question, I want to remind our listeners who makes my morning cup possible. And it's a big thank you to our presenting sponsors, EPB and Rockpoint Bank. Get EPB fiber optics for the world's fastest community-wide internet, and Rockpoint Bank, your local banking partner, your business, your bank, your future. All right, Duncan, this is my standard last question. I don't know if you've been tipped off to it or not, but what would you tell that 25-year-old Duncan Earl is important for a happy life?
So that's about half my age now. Okay. I would probably start by saying I've been here twice as long and I still don't really know what's going on. but there are some things that I think I've observed. Early on in your life, to be happier, you're generally adding things, right? You're adding a wife or adding children or adding a profession. And that's good. Nothing wrong with that. That's you're acquiring things and hopefully making your life richer. But as you get older, if you find yourself being less happy, it's usually not because you need to add something, but you need to let something go. And
great point.
It's very hard to do sometimes, almost as hard as adding it. But if you can identify those things that you need to let go of, usually you can improve your happiness, make yourself happier. And that'd be the advice. And then check back in when I'm 75, I guess.
and I would bet you that it kind of remains the same. As I've gotten older, you realize all the things you were striving to add aren't that important. And I heard a great quote that goes with this. We got to quit buying things we don't need to impress people we don't like.
That's perfect. Yeah.
And I love that. Well, this has been great. As I said, I've learned a bit, and I'm sure our listeners have. But what you're doing and your company's doing and EPB's doing, it really is earth-shattering in my estimation. It's the future, and from our standpoint, we're aware of it as a community, but really not in the depth that I think we need to know to appreciate it and what's being done.
Yeah, Agreed.
Yeah, and you've made that easy.
Thank you.
Thanks, Doug. Thanks for listening to My Morning Cup, a podcast by Costa Media Advisors. If you like this episode, please share it with a friend. I release a new episode each week, so be sure to subscribe on Spotify, Apple, Google, or wherever you listen to podcasts.